We begin with breaking news from Ottawa. We now have a better picture of what Blue Jays baseball is going to look like this summer. CBC News has learned that the federal government will not allow the Blue Jays to play ball in Toronto during the pandemic. David Cochran has more on that decision from our nation's capital.
We got official confirmation by the federal government that it is no way to the Blue Jays playing ball in Toronto for at least the regular season of the 2020 Major League Baseball season. We've got a statement from Marco Mendicino, who is the Minister of Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship, and he says, based on the best available public health advice, we have concluded the cross-border travel required for the Major League Baseball regular season play would not adequately protect Canadians' health and safety. As a result, Canada will not be issuing a national interest exemption for the Major League Baseball's regular season at this time. They say they have shared the news with the Blue Jays organization and remain open to considering future restart plans for the postseason. So if the Jays make the playoffs, should the risk of virus transmission diminish. This is something that the government has been dealing with at the federal level for several weeks now. We've seen this week, Natasha, that the City of Toronto and the Ontario government were willing to allow this to go ahead, provided strict quarantine measures were in place. That the Jays, when they were home, and any team that came in to play them, they stayed either at the Rogers Centre or at an adjoining hotel. They would not be allowed to go to their homes or go out into the community. But the federal government ultimately had the final say, because in this 60-game Major League Baseball season that is being proposed, is going to be crossing the border many times, and that is ultimately a federal issue because of the quarantine rules that have been put in place. And they just felt, based on the public health advice, that this was too much of a risk. So I know this may be disappointing for the Blue Jays, because the organization was very keen on playing its home game in Toronto, but this is perhaps not surprising when you consider what this would mean. I mean, the Jays would be opening their season in Tampa Bay against the Rays, and Florida right now is setting almost daily records for new COVID cases, and then the Rays would be coming to Toronto at a certain point. So just given the state of the virus in the United States, really the loss of control in massive numbers of states, more than 70,000 new cases today alone is the latest data we have. Canadian officials just looked at the risk and decided it was just too much to allow the Blue Jays to play in Toronto, even with severe quarantine restrictions. So now it falls on the Blue Jays about 10, 11 days away from their home opener to find a stadium where they can play ball.
CBC's David Cochran in Ottawa. And the team has just released a statement. The club says they respect the federal government's decision, and then go on to say, though our team will not be playing home games at the Rogers Centre this summer, our players will take to the field for the 2020 season with the same pride and passion representative of an entire nation. We cannot wait until the day comes that we can play in front of our fans again on Canadian soil. Well, let's keep on top of this breaking news story now. We've been joined by Marco Mendicino onto the program. He is the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship, and he joins us from Toronto. Minister, thank you so much for making time for us.
Hi, Natasha.
Hello, sir. So, Minister Mendicino, explain to us, David Cochran gave us a sense of it earlier, but what did you all have to consider in making today's decision?
Well, this was a decision that was very carefully taken and was driven by two principal factors. First, the best available advice that we received from the Public Health Agency of Canada about the health risks to Canadians were we to allow regular season games to be played in Toronto, which, as you already heard, contemplated repeated cross-border travel. And second, the current travel restrictions at the Canada-US border, which were mutually agreed by both of our countries, and were recently extended for another 30 days until August 21st, 2020. So throughout this process, we worked very closely with the MLB, with the Toronto Blue Jays, and with other levels of government. We were able to make the preseason training component of the season work because, as was pointed out, there was no cross-border travel, and they were essentially hubbed and isolated at the Rogers Centre. But having regard to the current state of affairs and the fact that the regular season proposal would require a lot of cross-border travel, the advice that we got was that there were serious risks that remained, and therefore we concluded that there was not a principal basis on which to issue a national interest exemption. And the last thing I'll say is, look, I get it. I'm a lifelong Jays fan. I remember being at the Rogers Centre, what was then called the Sky Dome in 1992, when we won that first World Series. And I remember being on front porches when I heard the crowd roar when Joey Bats did the bat flip. And so I get it as a fan. But we're not taking decisions as fans. We're taking decisions on the basis of evidence and the advice we received to protect the health and safety of all Canadians.
Okay. We also know, though, that the plan that had been produced by the Blue Jays was signed off by Toronto's mayor and Toronto's public health unit. So is it just a matter of that it didn't meet the federal government standards?
Well, as I said, we've worked very closely with all levels of government, including the City of Toronto, as well as the Province of Ontario. I had a good call with Mayor Tory earlier today, and I think he appreciated the risks that were in play. And we had a good call with the Toronto Blue Jays organization, and you heard from their statement that they appreciate where we're coming from. And we will continue to keep an open line of communication, both with the Major League Baseball, I beg your pardon, as well as the levels of government, and are open to reconsidering later on if the risks of the transmission of virus are significantly diminished, but not before then.
Many people will be watching this and wondering, well, why are you permitting hockey games to play in this country, but you're not going to allow for baseball games? Explain that distinction for us.
Well, there's a big difference in the plan that was put forward by the NHL, and that distinction, it lies in the fact that you have two hub cities, both of which are in Canada. All of the athletes, the support staff, and personnel are essentially in those hub cities, and there would be no cross-border travel to and from Canada. So that is one of the big distinctions. But we look at each and every one of these proposals that is being put forward by professional sports leagues. We understand that it's important to the economy, that it's important to many Canadians. And as I said, as a lifelong fan, I understand and appreciate that. But we have to take these decisions, particularly around the border, on the basis of the advice that we're receiving from health experts. And here, that was one of the main determining factors in arriving at our conclusion that there was no principled basis on which we could issue a national interest exemption at this time.
So what do you anticipate is going to happen with the Blue Jays? I know your portfolio is immigration and refugees, but if they're not going to be permitted to play here, what do you anticipate as a lifelong fan is going to happen?
Well, I've seen some initial statements from the Toronto Blue Jays that they're looking to find another location. I think ultimately that will be their decision and their call. And like many other Canadians, we'll still get to watch baseball. We'll still get to watch the Jays play, and we'll do so with a lot of pride. It'll just be broadcast from a different location. And I think that was the right call. At the end of the day, we had to take a look at the evidence. We had to consider the advice that we received from our health officials and our experts, which has always governed our decisions when it comes to the health controls which are in place, when it comes to the decisions around the border. And right now, the overwhelming feedback that I'm getting from my constituency and from the broader community is that this was the right decision, and I'm satisfied that this will be the one that governs for the time being.
Minister, was the big concern those huge spikes in numbers we're seeing in places like Florida in terms of this explosion of COVID-19 cases, that it really does not seem to be in control in the United States, and we're on a downward trajectory, hopefully, with the pandemic, at least certainly in the first wave of it. So how much of what you were seeing in Florida or in Texas or previously in New York State, how much of that played a role?
Well, of course, we're watching COVID-19 not only in the United States, but everywhere in the world. And as I pointed out, the agreement that we have in place was mutually understood and agreed to by both Canada and the United States for the purposes of limiting cross-border travel, except that which is truly essential. And that remains the position that we are in today. So, look, we have made a lot of progress in Canada. COVID-19 cases have significantly diminished over the past several weeks. I think that is largely attributable to the sacrifices that Canadians themselves have made in their way of going about life and work. And so the last thing we want to do is see a setback. And this decision, I think, reinforces our faith that we are moving in the right direction, our faith in Canadians. And we will, of course, continue to assess and keep an open line of communication with the MLB and other professional leagues, but we'll always take those decisions on the basis of the advice that we get, and also plan for the safe restart of our economy, which is also important. But in the end, this is the right decision and the right call for the present moment.
Okay, Minister, I want to thank you again so much for making time for us today.
Thank you, Natasha.
Marco Mendicino is the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship. He joined us from Toronto.